Hi, colleagues. Wow, we have just now give myself a little bit of a break here to sit with the Global Leadership Impact Summit before starting this recording. But um, thank you for those of you who are able to join us live, and I do surely hope those of you who are able to join us asynchronously engage in that space. Minimally, the day one work of listening to our panelists, engaging with their stories there and their change work. By now, you will see that the recordings to the Global Leadership Impact Summit are available within the Canvas course as well. But I just want to encourage you as you shift into this design phase, which this will be the formal launching video. I waited to record this one until after the Global Leadership Impact Summit was done. But as we shift into this work, to sit with and hopefully be inspired by some of the stories, and particularly the challenges that were identified throughout the course of both today and yesterday. So in terms of a timestamp, it is November the 2nd, and we just ended with the Global Leadership Impact Summit, day 2 of that particular work. So what I'm going to do here today, as we launch into the design phase, is pull up the 2 pages relevant to this particular part of your program experience. And so as is common within our work, I'm going to go ahead and pull those up. We'll work through this, give you a sense of what the next month will be like for you all. And I know several of you are very eager to get into your group environments and spaces and kick off this work. So let's get started with that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll dive right into it. So page 1 overview, you'll see, of course, this is a little bit of a back end baseball here, if you will, as a result of course, this video is not yet up here because I'm recording it currently. So I'll post that. You'll see that in here. I'm not sure why this looks like. Let me refresh because it's going to drive me. There we go. I have a good header image that goes all the way across as it should. So as we engage in this, there is a brief overview. This is our intro page. You'll see the actual intro video here as well, just here once we get started. But our goal, as you know, we are going to be working in small groups. You'll be engaging in a series of activities that facilitate your design sprint within that group space. You'll be working alongside a mentor, and there will be 4 major mentors. I'm also serving in that role. So some of you will be seeing me alongside this work, and I'll be inviting some guest speakers or guest mentors into that space as well, as is relevant or appropriate. But our goal is to develop an asset. And so we'll spend a little time with you all as mentors, helping you to think about what an asset might look like and to shift you into that thinking quickly. For those of you that joined us during the Global Leadership Impact Summit, you know that even in the course of 2 50-minute sessions, that sometimes, depending on the group, we need more brainstorming time. So I'm going to encourage you all, particularly those of you that joined us live. This was intentionally designed for you all as a test run of sorts. So you could see this action planning framework, particularly the second part of the storytelling framework in action, and as practiced live, because that work will take some time. And so I'm going to encourage you all to reflect on that and see how much time as a group you really think you need for this to commit to this so that you can get to that asset development very quickly, because you will need to, because you only have a month for this work here collectively, which before December 3rd. In fact, that is just a month and a day now. A month and a day now you have until you present your projects. So let's go ahead and dive into it, into the second page. So this page represents the majority of the content. There are a few things that will be posted when you get to a given week as to not overwhelm you with content on this page. There's a lot of content on this page. I'll say that first and foremost. So I'm going to go a quick scan here and we'll highlight various parts of this particular page for you. There's the intro, as there always is, to give you a sense of what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we have done, and where we're going. So for those of you that like that context, please read this because it does give you that sense. It also gives you an insight into particularly what's happening long-term and the types of futures that we want to help create. Your starting and directions are simple, at least on this page, kept it very simple for you. This page is your guiding documents. So it guides you through the entirety of the design phase, again, minus a few documents that will be published in this space once you get to the second and or end of the second week of the design sprint. That being said, you'd very much do want to do a quick scan of it. And this video alone might serve as that, but I would recommend that you do a deeper scan by actually reading and engaging with this content so you know the details of what you're about to be asked to do. I have organized it into the who, what, when, where, why, and how as a means to help you think through the variables that are involved in this particular piece. The who is what I'm going to recommend you look at first if you're looking for it. So that's starting directions number 3, because that actually lists the groups, your group members, the group lead or coordinator for scheduling, as well as your mentors. The how also actually does walk through step by step the process that we want you to follow here. So the what just gives you a sense of like, what are we building? Why are we building that? What are the things that I'll be producing? So there's a series, a little bit that talks about the asset. We also give you some insight. So for those of you that are really looking for like, I have no idea where to start. And I know some of you don't yet necessarily have the confidence or the backgrounding that that launches you into what I think many of you would deem as a creative project or a creative asset. And that's absolutely fine. Many of you might go that direction, but others might not. And I'll give you an example of that. So there was one group that really was talking about that series of stories, a curation of stories. Some of you might not be positioned to understand, or at least very quickly and easily imagine what that could look like and what its utility might be in serving change work around the world. But these assets, what we've given you here, these are real, genuine change management assets that support the work that we do. Many of you might be familiar with these. So you might, within your group, identify a particular challenge, particular action, and develop a project charter. And that project charter could be the asset you build to help launch folks into this work around the world, which is huge because project charters in and of themselves are often things that folks neglect to do as part of change management and that process broadly. But also we need some guidance in this work, right? So getting them started, getting a project started by way of a charter could be instrumental in the change processes that folks are taking up around the world. Same thing with a strategic plan. So a strategic plan is work. It's a lot of work to put together a strategic plan. And so I'm imagining a group of 6 of you that represent various parts of the world coming together for a collaborative strategic plan around a specific challenge and a series of actions. That also is highly significant. And likewise, I could go through and justify each of these assets and their utility, but that's going to be the type of work that you do with your mentor. And start to make sense of based on this challenge, these actions, what asset should we create and why, right? And so those are going to be some starting assets, though, that you could think through as a group if you're looking for a place to start and aren't sure where to start. There is information here already for those of you that really want to look forward to December 3rd. I haven't provided all the information because, again, I didn't want to overwhelm you on this page as of yet. Because I really do want to encourage you to get right into the design sprint itself, so into the how section. But you will have 20 minutes to present your work. And so I'll give you a little bit of insight into what that presentation space will look like, as well as the expectations therein. I'm going to quickly scroll through here, though, as it means to not labor on this point, since more information will be shared as we get closer to the 3rd. So the why. Just gives you additional understanding of why we're doing this work and why we're having you do it in this way. The who. So here are your groups. So you can see, for instance, group 1 is composed of Richard Powers, who is just as everyone at the top of this list is the designated lead. So as I said, don't read into this beyond that. But Richard here is group 1, as well as Monique, Clarissa, Jean-Jacques, and John. You are all part of group 1. As well as you've been assigned Jennifer Mathis, our CEO, as your group mentor. Similarly, group 3, group 2, group 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we have 8 total groups. So do take some time reading through that section. Make sure you have a good understanding of what group you're in, as well as who that designated lead. The top of the list for every single group is that designated lead. So you are responsible. That's Summer, Jennifer, Lemia, Tarek, Chrissy, Michael, Paulina, and Richard. So you're the designated group leads or the schedule coordinators. So what that means is not that you are responsible for coordinating absolutely everything as the project manager of your group. That might be the case, and your group might decide based on a conversation about roles that is the direction you want to take. But in this particular case, we just need to get a meeting set, and we need to figure out how we're meaning to collaborate as we kick things off. So the 8 of you have just been designated by virtue of how you ended up in this list, that particular role. And so I'm going to ask that as you all communicate to each other and share each other, get connected via email, is to actually have that conversation around schedules, have that conversation around how do we want to do this work. And you'll notice I'll pull one of these up for group one, that each group has a designated planning document. So if we were to look at group ones, for instance, and each of these look exactly the same, but if we were to look at group ones, there is space where you actually can get started asynchronously. And so via email, you might determine that. And that might be a tactic that your group takes throughout the next month is like, hey, it looks like we all can't meet until Saturday. And up to you. If you want to meet on the weekends, please feel free to. I'm not going to limit when you can meet here by any means. But that initial meeting here, you might decide nevertheless to get started. You can already get started by pasting your individual storytelling framework documents right into this document. One second, I'm going to take a moment to copy. So you can already get started with that work. But again, this is your personal storytelling framework. As I said, you are being asked to share that. And this is the space where you're going to share that. So you can paste that link already ahead of time, and you would just add your name here and then the link to your document. Do make sure the share settings are on so folks can engage with that. But you can actually get started with this particular space if you would like. This, however, please do note, and you'll see this in the how section, that this is meant to be a collaborative. You are revisiting the living story section because you're going to be moving through this in this first week collaboratively. But that is work that you could do potentially asynchronously and think through how you do that work. I'm going to recommend, though, nevertheless, that you find a way to collate all of your contributions, because this is meant to be a collaborative decision-making process around the challenge that you ultimately are going to settle on, which for many of you might be best served through a synchronous meeting. But there are possibilities of doing that asynchronously as well. So each of you do have a designated planning document. So if you're itching to get started, feel free to already dive into that document because you have that shared space as a group. All right, we're going to have a quick scroll, so apologies, I forgot to warn you there. We do have some recommended tools. And so if you are not sure how to get started, there is this space as well. There's likewise a Zoom space that you can leverage for this work. So if you want to hop into a Zoom space and don't have a license yourself, please let me know. You can reach out to me via email, and I'll help to get that started. Likewise, apologies for the yawn here. Here, we're getting my authentic self here. I need my second cup of coffee here, I think here. But the when. So your deadline is December 3rd. Your deadline is December 3rd. That being said, we articulate here that some of you might request special permissions to extend the actual final publication of your asset to a week, 2 weeks, perhaps even 3 weeks after. I'm nevertheless going to request that we try to make the deadline the end of the calendar year. Just because I know that as we shift into the spring semester, you all will have a lot going on. So I do want to make sure we have that arrangement and that understanding ahead of time. I'm happy to extend that brief or minor extension of an asset's final publication, but do take that month between now and December 3rd to heart as you do this work and try to make that your deadline. It's not meant to, if we were to parallel to the dissertation phase, which, as you all know, I'm in the middle of here. But this is not meant to be a book. It's meant to be a single asset. And in this case, that might be metaphorically a single chapter, perhaps even a series of pages with a much larger body of work. So you are all collectively contributing to that larger manuscript, if you will, within that space of that metaphor. So this is not meant to be a huge endeavor. It's meant to be a significant one that's meaningful, one that's contextualized. But that month should be enough time for you to produce that asset. But I recognize many of you might take up something that you require a little bit more time for. So please do let us know by reaching out to me via email if you are thinking you might require that extension. And that will become clear as you embark on the work. The where. So we'll be meeting virtually, of course. It just articulates that you all can meet in whatever capacity and whatever spaces make the most sense for you. We are not bounding that. Now, getting into the how. This is by far the largest section, as you will see, of this page. So you're going to start off with a conversation, get together within your group. Your contact information is in the contact information document. However, you should also be able to see people, and you can engage in the emails there. I'll be also emailing each of the groups myself. So you at least have that as a starting space to dialogue back and forth. But you do not need to retain me on that email thread unless you would like to. But get together. have an initial meeting to make sure you're talking about things like how are we going to communicate, how are we meeting, get some meetings scheduled. If you all, I would recommend in that first meeting, you determine how long you're going to meet for. So maybe, for instance, you take the tactic of meeting for 3 hours. And 1 week you meet for 3 hours to get a bunch of work done. And then you are assigning yourself some asynchronous work. Establish roles. So who's going to do what in that regard? Are you going to have a project manager? Is that a role that's shifting, for instance, which I might also recommend you all think about. So you're going to be going ahead and doing some of that work as well. As a group, you're then going to return to that storytelling framework. And I know you all can read this, but I'll just briefly go through it and provide any additional anecdotes that I might think are helpful here. We're going to go through that framework as that you did as individuals, but you're going to do it as a group. So working through a collective story. This might prove challenging for some of you. But tie and find connections. You are all placed in groups based on the contributions you've already made to the program and things you've articulated to me that you are passionate about and that you care about. So find those meaningful connections and move towards telling a collaborative story as you develop this asset, because you are, of course, developing an asset together. And even if you each have very different lived experiences, which you do, and very different passion projects and things you really want to focus on, this asset is a collaborative one. So you will have a collaborative story. And this work is asking you, this particular bullet point here, number 2, is asking you to identify that collaborative story and move towards telling it. You can always revise it, you can always go back to it, but start to tell your collaborative story here together. All right, so you are then actually going to move into the work of settling on a single challenge. So this is what we did during the Global Leadership Impact Summit. You might choose to take up one of the ideas directly that was shared. You might choose to respond directly to something that one of the panelists shared as well, and use that as a starting point. I know at least one of you was significantly impacted in your thinking and your reflecting by one of the panelists, because you shared that with me. So thank you, by the way, for sharing that with me. But that might be the strategy you use. But nevertheless, I am asking that you be responsive to and take into account what folks said. So do not ignore it, right? And make sure that if minimally, you can use that as part of your storytelling, that this is maybe in direct response or links to something that someone had said. Maybe you were inspired by it. Maybe that it got you thinking. Archive that and document that those linkages. One of the things I think that we can do that's most important and significant in our work and impactful is making sure that we're storing how the work came to be. Who was involved in that? Who were all the folks that really contributed to your thinking along the way? So identify those linkages as you go about this work as well. But you are going to settle on a single challenge. And that challenge can be a large challenge that you then more narrowly scope out in terms of a single asset, or that can be a very specific challenge. For instance, you might want to focus on lack of global standards around accessibility, right? And a shared understanding around that surface today. That's a very specific challenge. And maybe that there's just a lack of those standards. So maybe what you all do is actually move towards coming up with a draft collaborative and global standards for something like accessibility. That could be a unique challenge that then leads to a unique asset. So just throwing that out there as an idea, for instance, that and as a means to give you inspiration about what do I mean by a unique challenge. You're also then going to brainstorm potential solutions to that challenge by actually completing that living story section. So this is the exact same tactic that we used during the Global Leadership Impact Summit with some of our community members. But now for those of you who are joining us live and joining us asynchronously, you will have practiced that. So you're going to do that motion, move through that as a group. You'll identify the actions, you'll identify the stakeholders, move through that as iteratively as you need. So you might come up with a single action and say, you know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is the action. Go through the process again, but do actually complete all the prompting questions because it'll help you determine which action you want to take forward. You might also determine as a group that you have the capacity to take multiple actions forward and address via your asset multiple actions. After you engage with that, it'll help you identify a single action that you want to take forward to really focus on developing an asset around regardless. And that's where you will shift into the anti-narrative section of the framework specifically, because the last question of the living story asks you to identify that action you're really inspired to take forward. And the second part of that framework, the final third part of the framework, the anti-narrative section, particularly the reflect and crafting portions, are really what you want to get started with through the building playbook that is just below on this page to launch into your asset development. So that's a lot that I just said. What I'm going to recommend you do is within the very first week, week and a half, but by the second week particularly, is that you give yourself the time to do this work collectively. So throughout the rest of this week, and I would say no more than half of next week, is to get to the point where you know what you care about as a group and what you want to take forward. And this will need to be something you consciously tend to shift forward. You'll need to meet. You will need to determine this, or you will lose that opportunity and definitely feel behind in the sprint, because this is a sprint. Not impossible, but you'll feel a little bit behind. And then what we'll do is shifting into the building playbook. And I recommend that you start building sometime during your second week. And that's my recommended cadence there, is that by the end of that second week, you're starting to really build that. We will launch into the testing phase and recommend as mentors to you that you're actually getting feedback either at the beginning or the middle of your third week, the beginning or middle of your third week of this program, or this particular phase of the program. So you want to make sure you give your stakeholders enough time to give you feedback. And then the last week will really be your opportunity to revise. So stepping back and thinking about that cadence, that there's a little bit of what we might say is wiggle room, flexibility in the schedule. You all might get to the point where the last week you actually split between feedback and revisions, and that's how you map out that very final, that fourth week, and which will give you a little bit more time for building. So as a group, as you map out your project charter, which you're also asked to do during the building playbook, we'll see that just down, really think about that cadence, think about your ideal timeline and how you want to leverage the next 4 weeks for this work. Because you might want to spend a little bit more time in the brainstorming part of it and the reflection part to make sure that you all have a really good understanding of what you want to take forward. And some of you might finish that within your first meeting and want to launch right into the building of your asset. So really it'll be up to your groups here and your mentors there to provide some assistance along the way. So once you've made your way all the way through the building playbook, this will be number 6 here. You're then going to, as I said, shift into the testing protocol. That will be put in here as starting the second week. So you won't. We're intentionally holding that off, not to lack transparency, but because this page already has a lot. So we want to make sure that your mentor has an opportunity to onboard you to that particular document and make recommendations therein. Before you jump forward and think too much about that at this time, because that will need to be sensitive and responsive to the work you're all doing. Likewise, when you get to the storytelling part, we're going to hold that so that your mentor can actually work with you directly as a group to determine what type of storytelling, what format of storytelling makes the most sense for you all. But we'll give you some insight already about what that looks like. There is an analyze section that's right within your group document. So I'm going to move back over here and do a quick scroll live. But in this document, you'll notice, as well as the framework itself, a series of sections to take notes. Some of these will not yet make sense if you're just watching this recording because we haven't talked about them yet. But there's a building space. So as you build your asset, you can use the space to take notes, document, and archive along the way your process. Same thing, testing notes. This analyze, there's going to be a point in time in this process in the storytelling framework after you've tested where I ask you to step back and think about everything you've learned. Think about the linkages to identify if there's anything you're missing, anything that you haven't yet thought about. And this is a reflection space. So what I'm asking you to do at that particular stage is actually work in this document as individuals, reflect on your process. There are some prompts here as well that I'm asking you to think around. And then to do some of that reflection work, at least in this doc. And so if you're thinking from an asynchronous model, each of you could leave your reflections individually and then just assign yourselves the task of reading back and engaging via comments, plus ones, you name it in the doc. But you're going to have to do that as well. That's number 7. And then you're going to shift into the very final phase of this design sprint, which is engaging with the sharing toolkit. Which will be the place where you tell your story and ask you to think about how to do that, how to package that. And by package, I quite literally mean what are you going to use to tell the story? Are you imagining this being on a web space? Are you imagining this being in a blog post? Would you like to do a series of video recordings like I'm doing here to introduce this work? So you'll work with your mentors, as I said, to really think about the type of format for your story. But there will be, as part of that sharing toolkit, a series of minimally a series of prompting questions that you all need to respond to and address as a group so that there's consistency across the board for when we ultimately move your content into the digital space that we're creating to curate the work of IELOL Global and our global leadership change work. So the very, very, very final phase is that December 3rd session where you actually share your work with the world and those that come. So that is the cadence. This is the design phase in a quick nutshell, if you will. That's a colloquialism here, but in brief, this is the design phase at a glance. Looking at the building playbook, a few things I want to draw your attention to, because this is what you want to start to launch into as soon as you do that reflecting work and that collaborative brainstorming as a group. You will establish a series of SMART goals that you all are thinking about your timeline, your capacity, as well as scope, really tending to that and establishing some really clear goals that you're able to launch. So this link will take you to a reference on SMART goals, and I want you to minimally write a few SMART goals. You'll see that there is spacing and a quick scroll once more in this document, but you can actually drop your SMART goals here so that when you meet with your mentor, you'll be sharing this. This document is shared with your mentors as well. But you'll be meeting and talking around this so they can help follow along with your progress. There'll also be, there's a brief introduction to charters. I'm going to ask that you actually draft a charter together. And so you'll notice also here that you can draft your charter. This does not have to, I know some of you have experience with charters. It does not have to look like this collaborative charter that Angela and I put together. It does not have to be that extensive. This is, I think, maybe a 30-page document. But nevertheless, the most important things that I really want you to think about is what's your goal? Who are you in this work? Who's doing what? So what are your roles? What's your timeline? What's your scope? And how do you know what is in and out of scope? How are you determining that? So the most important thing that you're going to get out of this project charter work is making sure that you are scoping your work really strategically. That being said, this will also be a very helpful exercise in actually documenting your process. So the project charter is a great one for that. Apologies, I'm going to take a very quick drink here. All right. There are a couple other things that we're going to ask you to do throughout this, which will be very new for some of you. But there's a piece on design for social impact. This can be done individually, but it is a piece to help anchor your thinking around why design is important. Now, why are we doing this? Well, of course, you are all designing an asset, and this asset is meant to help bring about social change. So you are designing for social impact. So this will be a helpful orientation to you in terms of some of the things to be thinking about as you engage in this design work as a group. There is additionally a piece about liberatory design that I'm going to ask you to just check out. This is a web page here, and we can give a quick scan in terms of cadence, look at what's on here. I'm going to just do a quick scroll of the whole entirety of the page. So this introduces you to liberatory design, talks about why it's important, talks about the co-creation process, which you all will actually be engaging with along the way. And gives you those resources and some history about this particular source. So not a long resource by any means that we're asking you to engage with and read, but a little bit more time that might take you is this liberatory design deck. So I'm going to pull this up so you can see this, but there are a series of mindsets and modes. And we're going to ask just to help you anchor your work and give you something that is very design thinking oriented in mind. To make sure that you're tending to as a group is to pick 3 mindsets and 3 modes to explore and engage with as a group and genuinely to do the exercises. This could take a week. You could do this over the course of 3 weeks, but it might be something that you want to pull back in. If I were to really do this and follow design thinking, this would be something I would do right in the beginning of my work here and ensure that I'm doing this alongside the planning work. So that we're tending to these mindsets and modes as we do the rest of our building work. So I'm going to pull up this resource and do a quick scroll. So mindset wise, we can look at, for instance, this card in the deck, which is build relational trust. So it talks about a little bit about why this is important and also talks about how. So these are the things that I want you all to think about. If you chose this card, you are going to be moving to practice and committing to these as a group. So you're wanting to facilitate personal connection by inviting people in your group to share what matters to them. You're going to be dedicating time and space for people to bring forward their full selves and identities, et cetera, right? So you're committing to this particular card. And there's a space within your planning documents here where you can identify and pull over your mindsets and your modes. Think of this as a community agreement, community contract, where you're articulating community expectations as a group. To how you're going to be and who you're going to be as a group. So choose, add 3 cards that are mindset cards, pull those cards down, and articulate which cards you're really committing to as a group. Now I'm going to scroll down again once more, because we'll get down to the mode section of this document. All right, so the modes, liberatory design modes. So it talks to you a little bit about what these modes are and how they're different than the mindsets. But if we were to look at this one, for instance, notice. So notice by practicing self-awareness, seeking context about the systems you design within, and exploring the history of oppression in those systems to develop an equity-based identity. If you chose the notice design mode, it actually gives you a series of key questions to ask. And so if were in a group and I chose this, if I'm committed to this as a group, you should do this exercise to actually think and reflect and explore the answers to these questions. So like, who am I? Where are we collectively in our work together? What is my and our team's relationship to opportunity and institutional power? How does it relate to that of people most impacted by this challenge? And what realities and constraints do we need to understand to address in our work? So these are some key questions that you all can sit with. You chose this particular card and to engage in this activity. So we're asking you to do that, to continue to further anchor your work in both liberatory design as well as design for social impact, which we are heavily influenced by as program facilitators. Now, lastly, you're going to actually embark from that point on into building and creating your asset. And so this will be some build time. So this might mean website design. This might mean Google document creation and content writing. This might mean graphic creation. There are a number of things that you might actually need to rely on as a group to develop your asset. This might mean going out and collecting stories. This might be writing up a Google form to ask folks to speak into and identifying stakeholders. You name it, there's a lot of work that will go into this asset that you create. And I do want to encourage you, an asset could be a single page document, but that single page document might take you 2.5 to 3 whole weeks to create and do so well. So just really sit with that. It doesn't need to be a multi-page website, though. If you notice that other group, that example we shared on this page, they did that in the span of the same design sprint that you all have. So they had no more than 3 weeks to create their asset. All right, so you're going to be building your asset throughout this. As I said, the rest of this page is the testing protocol as well as the sharing toolkit. We give you a little bit of insight just so you have enough right now to get you started in thinking about what you'll be doing during those stages of the design sprint, but we're holding back and overwhelming you with all of the content so that what you're focusing on is the living story part of the framework, the anti-narrative part of the framework, as well as this building toolkit. Because over the next 2 weeks, those are the 3 sections of this page that you really should be spending your time on. All right, so with that, get into it. I thoroughly look forward. I'll be checking with all the groups regardless. I know I'm not the group mentor for all 8 groups. That being said, I will be doing a check-in to make sure things are rolling smoothly. I have regular touch points with each of your mentors as well. So we'll be having weekly meetings to check in on the work that you all are doing and where you are all at in this work. But as always, you can reach out to me, questions, comments, concerns, any support you need. I'll end on this one thought, this one observation rather. This is, as you know, the second year we are doing this. And I can anticipate that some of you, given where you're at in life, given your capacity, that some of you might be entering the work for the first time, that your last 3 weeks were more stressful than you thought they were going to be. Welcome to the work. Welcome to your group. Welcome to this thinking. Some of you might have a week where your capacity was more taxed than others. Please keep that in mind. You might have a group member that maybe doesn't respond for 3 days, but nevertheless, the work will need to progress. And I recognize that. That will be a challenge in this work, and particularly a challenge in this design, the design sprint, the month that you all have to do this work together. Now, that being said, just be courteous, be kind, be respectful, be understanding. But nevertheless, you're here. You've committed already to this work. So let me know. I know that can be challenging, but let me know if you need any assistance in working within your group as well. Because I know this will be a very big shift from what we've been doing thus far, where we have been facilitating our conversations on our end. Now the work is up to you, but nevertheless, have fun. And I thoroughly hope that this next month is as generative as it has been for the first cohort as well. But see you soon. And the next time you see me on video in this manner, I'll be welcoming you to the transformation phase of the program and our very final day together.